The Egyptian sun bore down mercilessly on the excavation site, its heat radiating off the golden dunes. Dr. Leila Rashid wiped a layer of sweat from her forehead as she carefully brushed away the fine dust covering the base of the obelisk. The monolith had been buried beneath the desert for millennia, hidden beneath the ruins of an ancient temple near Abydos. "This is impossible," muttered David Stein, her longtime colleague and lead archaeologist. "The carbon dating places this structure thousands of years before the first known pharaohs." Leila glanced at the intricate carvings, running her fingers over the worn but still visible script. The symbols weren't hieroglyphs, at least, not entirely. Some were similar to pre-dynastic Egyptian inscriptions, but others were alien, unfamiliar. "Not impossible," Leila murmured. "Just forgotten." She stepped back, surveying the towering obelisk. Unlike those built in later centuries, this one was constructed from a dark, metallic stone, its surface almost impervious to the wear of time. The hieroglyphs depicted the Nile, but in an unnatural way. The river flowed in all directions, branching into geometric patterns that looked more like circuitry than natural waterways. Then there were the figures, tall, elongated beings standing above kneeling humans. Some panels depicted them raising their hands toward the sky, while others showed them submerged in water, their forms merging with the river itself. David sighed. "I don't like this. We should document and leave it alone." But Leila wasn't listening. She had spent years searching for evidence of Heket-Ka-Nut, a lost legend whispered about in ancient texts. The story spoke of a device, an artifact that had the power to restore the land. Some texts called it a gift from the gods, while others warned that it had nearly destroyed civilization. Now, it was within her grasp. "Help me move the base stones," she instructed. David hesitated but complied. Together, with the aid of the local excavation team, they began shifting the weathered stones surrounding the obelisk's foundation. As they worked, the air seemed to grow heavier, the desert winds dying into an eerie silence. Then, as the last stone was lifted, something clicked. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the earth. The symbols on the obelisk flared with a faint golden light. And miles away, the Nile River roared. In Luxor, fishermen along the Nile were the first to notice. The current, which had been sluggish during the dry season, suddenly surged with an unnatural force. The river, once calm and predictable, swelled over its banks as if driven by an unseen hand. The water was different too, darker, richer, almost luminous under the moonlight. And it was rising. By the time news reached Cairo, satellite images had already captured the phenomenon. The river was expanding, branching out into new pathways, flooding dry valleys that had not seen water for thousands of years. And wherever the water touched, the desert changed. "What are we looking at?" Egyptian geologist Dr. Hassan Kamal asked as he observed the live satellite feed. The images showed vast patches of green emerging where there had once been only barren sand. Plants, thick and ancient-looking, spread unnaturally fast, their roots weaving into dunes, binding them together into fertile land. "This is not normal," Hassan muttered. "This is controlled." Back at the dig site, Leila and her team had barely managed to reassemble after the obelisk activated. They gathered in their makeshift research tent, staring at the real-time data pouring in. "The water is spreading at an exponential rate," David said, his voice tight with worry. "It's not just reviving the desert, it's restructuring it." Leila swallowed hard, her mind racing. The hieroglyphs had spoken of the river's power, of a long-lost mechanism hidden beneath the earth. Could it really have been a terraforming system, buried for millennia? And if so, who had built it? Her laptop beeped. A new satellite scan showed something beneath the surface of the expanding green zone, an enormous circular structure, previously undetected, now revealed as the desert shifted. "It's not just the land that's changing," she said, turning to David. "Something is waking up." The next day, Leila, David, and a small research team ventured into the underground passage beneath the obelisk. The tremors had dislodged portions of the ancient ruins, revealing an entrance they hadn't noticed before, a massive doorway sealed with interlocking stone mechanisms. It took hours of careful work, but at last, the doorway slid open, revealing a spiraling stairway descending deep into the earth. The air inside was thick, undisturbed for thousands of years, carrying the scent of stone and something metallic. Flashlights illuminated walls covered in glowing inscriptions, their golden text pulsing as if responding to their presence. This isn't possible, David whispered. What kind of technology is this? Leila traced her fingers over the symbols, feeling a strange warmth beneath her touch. The images told a story, a great catastrophe that had once dried the land, followed by the arrival of the architects, the same elongated beings from the obelisk carvings. They had built Heket-Ka-Nut, using it to restore life to the Nile. But something had gone wrong. The next set of carvings depicted panic, people running from towering waves of vegetation, the desert consuming entire cities. And then, sealing rituals. Priests and scribes locking away the mechanism, burying it beneath the obelisk, warning that it must never be reactivated. David's voice broke the silence. Leila, look at this. She turned to where he was shining his flashlight. At the center of the chamber stood a massive console, covered in the same glowing script. Suspended above it was a sphere of liquid-like metal, slowly rotating, pulsating with energy. Leila's breath caught in her throat. Heket-Ka-Nut was still active. And they had just triggered it. As the team ascended back to the surface, the world around them had already changed. The once barren landscape stretched with green tendrils, creeping ever closer to civilization. The air felt charged, electric, as if the very fabric of nature had shifted. Back in Cairo, the Egyptian government declared an emergency. Roads leading to the affected regions were shut down. Scientists from around the world scrambled to explain the phenomenon. Was it climate change? An underground aquifer? A previously unknown species of hyperadaptive plant life? None of the explanations made sense. And then came the disappearances. Near the rapidly expanding green zone, entire villages were found empty. No bodies. No signs of struggle. Just abandoned homes, possessions left untouched, as if the people had simply vanished. Leila knew this was only the beginning. Whatever Heket-Ka-Nut had been designed for, it was far more than just a terraforming device. The ancient texts had called it a gift from the gods. But the last carvings in the chamber had shown something else, something terrifying. The final inscription had not spoken of life. It had spoken of returning. The transformation spread faster than anyone had anticipated. Satellite imagery from a European space agency showed an unnatural acceleration. What had started as an expansion of the Nile's floodplains had turned into an uncontrolled reawakening. In less than a week, vast stretches of desert had turned into lush, thriving landscapes, the greenery pushing further into the arid lands of North Africa. Governments declared states of emergency. Scientists raced to understand the phenomenon. Military forces were dispatched to the advancing vegetation line, but nothing could stop the spread. Where the new water reached, the land responded instantly, rivers forming in minutes, forests growing in hours, and ancient ruins surfacing from beneath dunes that had hidden them for millennia. Leila Rashid sat in a high-security conference room in Cairo, surrounded by scientists, government officials, and military leaders. She had barely slept since their discovery of Heket-Ka-Nut. The enormity of what they had unleashed weighed heavily on her. Dr. Hassan Kamal, Egypt's foremost geophysicist, stood at the front of the room, gesturing toward a live satellite projection. This is today's updated map. The green zone has doubled in size in less than 48 hours. If it continues at this rate, Cairo will be overrun in 2 weeks. The room erupted into murmurs. A military official leaned forward. We need to know, what is causing this? Is this natural or something engineered? Leila cleared her throat. It's neither. We believe the mechanism we activated is ancient technology. It isn't just reviving the land, it's rewriting it. Terraforming, Hassan added grimly. The official frowned. Terraforming for what? Leila hesitated. The answer was in the inscription she had deciphered, but saying it aloud felt impossible. David, her colleague, spoke in her stead. The carvings in the underground chamber suggest that this process is part of a larger system. The river isn't just spreading water, it's following a pattern, restoring something preordained. Restoring what? Someone pressed. Leila took a deep breath. A world that existed before ours. The room fell silent. The reports of missing people escalated. At first, it had been isolated villages along the Nile, their inhabitants disappearing without a trace. Now, entire research stations had gone silent. The latest case involved a military outpost near the newly formed oasis of Kurga, where a team of 20 men had vanished overnight. A reconnaissance drone sent to investigate the site transmitted eerie footage. The camp's perimeter remained untouched. Equipment was still operational. Personal belongings were left behind. But there were no people. Only one strange detail stood out. Deep, vine-like roots had overtaken the camp, growing in perfect spirals. The vegetation looked unnatural, as if it had grown around the absence of the missing men. Leila and David stood in front of a monitor in Cairo's Emergency Operations Center, watching the footage on repeat. "This isn't just an ecosystem change," David murmured. "This is intentional." Leila nodded. The ancient inscriptions had spoken of something beyond just the land's rebirth. The Nile's restoration was a signal. But to whom? A field team sent to study the newly grown forests near the expanding Nile barely made it back alive. Dr. Ahmed Nabil, the team leader, arrived in Cairo in a state of shock, his face pale, his hands trembling. He was rushed into a debriefing room, where Leila and the others awaited his report. "What happened?" Leila asked. Ahmed's voice was hoarse. "We were in the green zone, collecting soil and water samples. Everything was surreal. The trees, the grass, none of it matched any known species. The air itself felt charged, like there was something alive in it." He swallowed hard. "Then we heard it." David leaned forward. "Heard what?" Ahmed's fingers curled around the chair's armrests. "A voice. No, many voices. Whispering from the trees, from the water, from the very ground beneath us. Calling our names." The room went silent. Leila's heart pounded. And then, Ahmed hesitated. "We saw them." His team's body cam footage was played on the conference room screen. The images were grainy, distorted by electromagnetic interference. But through the static, moving figures were visible, tall, elongated silhouettes, half hidden among the trees. Their forms were almost human but stretched unnaturally, their limbs too long, their eyes reflecting an eerie golden light. "They watched us," Ahmed whispered. Then, one of them spoke. The sound played on the recording, a deep, resonant tone, not of human origin. The voice spoke in a language that none of them recognized, yet the meaning was clear. "You have restored the river. The land remembers. The first shall return." Then the video cut to black. Leila and David returned to the underground chamber beneath the obelisk, desperate to find answers before it was too late. The glowing inscriptions had changed. Where before they had spoken of the past, now they spoke of the present. The glyphs rearranged themselves, forming a new message. "The flood is complete. The way is open." As they stood there, the earth trembled. A deep rumbling came from beneath their feet. Something massive was shifting beneath the surface. David's face went pale. "We need to leave. Now." They barely made it back to the surface when the desert erupted. From the heart of the expanding green zone, a structure began to rise, an enormous, monolithic tower, ancient and untouched, hidden beneath the sand for thousands of years. The tower pulsed with energy, its surface covered in the same alien inscriptions. Then, as they watched, the tower opened. And something inside stirred. Back in Cairo, the Egyptian government declared a total lockdown of the expanding zone. Military forces were deployed, fighter jets circling the growing anomaly. But before any action could be taken, a new event occurred. A pulse of golden light erupted from the monolithic tower, expanding outward in a massive shockwave. Communications failed, power grids flickered, and an electromagnetic field engulfed the transformed lands. Then, from the structure they emerged. The figures from Ahmed's footage, tall, elongated beings draped in shimmering robes, their eyes glowing with an unnatural radiance. They stepped from the tower's entrance as if they had merely been asleep, waiting for their moment to return. The world watched in stunned silence as they moved through the newly formed landscape, their very presence altering the air around them. Leila stood frozen, unable to comprehend what she was seeing. David whispered beside her, his voice laced with awe and fear. "They're not invaders, are they?" Leila swallowed hard. No, she murmured. They were always here. The world held its breath. Satellite feeds showed the colossal monolithic tower standing at the heart of the transformed Nile basin, its surface pulsing with ancient energy. Around it, the desert had vanished, replaced by lush, otherworldly vegetation. But the most terrifying revelation was what lay beneath. As the golden pulse had rippled through the landscape, it had unearthed something far older than the pyramids, an entire lost city, buried under the sands for millennia. Massive structures, towering obelisks, and what appeared to be an immense circular temple had surfaced, their pristine architecture untouched by time. And then, from the depths of the monolithic tower, they had emerged. The beings were tall, their elongated forms shrouded in liquid metallic robes. Their eyes burned with golden light, and as they moved, the newly reborn vegetation bent toward them, as though recognizing its true masters. They had not arrived. They had been waiting. Leila Rashid stood at the edge of the quarantine zone, staring at the towering figures. The Egyptian government had deployed its forces, but no action had been taken yet, no weapons fired, no hostilities exchanged. Because the beings were not attacking. They walked through the newly terraformed land with slow, deliberate steps, observing, as if reacquainting themselves with their surroundings. And then, one of them turned. Leila gasped as she felt its gaze settle on her. A golden glow rippled through the air, and without moving its lips, a voice thundered inside her mind. You have restored the river. The balance returns. We awaken. Leila staggered backward, clutching her temples. The voice wasn't just heard, it was felt, as though it resonated within her very cells. David rushed to her side. Leila! What happened? She looked up, eyes wide. They're speaking. Not in words, directly into my mind. Before she could say more, another pulse of golden light radiated from the tower, and suddenly, the sky changed. Above them, strange formations flickered in the clouds. Symbols, ancient, shifting, appeared in the heavens, written in the same alien script found in the chamber beneath the obelisk. The beings had not just returned. They were sending a message to the world. Across the globe, panic spread. Scientists, linguists, and governments struggled to decipher the celestial symbols. Were they a warning? A declaration of ownership? Or something worse? Leila and her team returned to the underground chamber, desperate for answers. The inscriptions had shifted again, responding to the architect's awakening. This time, the message was clear. The covenant was made. The Nile would remain. If disturbed, we shall return. David's face darkened. They were never gone. They were in stasis, waiting for the right moment to return. Leila traced the final lines of the inscription. We shared the waters. We shaped the land. And when they turned against us, we left. But the river is eternal. She exhaled sharply. This isn't just about the Nile. This is about a broken pact. David's eyes widened. You mean, ancient Egyptians didn't build this technology? Leila shook her head. No. They were given it. And when they tried to control it, the architects sealed themselves away. She turned to the console at the heart of the chamber. Its pulsing energy had intensified, responding to the presence of its creators. The last inscription glowed brighter. The river does not belong to one people. It belongs to the first. And with those words, the chamber trembled again. Something else was waking up. In Cairo, military leaders debated whether to launch an attack. But no one knew if conventional weapons would even work. As world leaders watched from afar, the architects gathered at the base of the monolithic tower. Then, with slow, synchronized movements, they raised their arms. The ground shook. The river shifted. And then, the entire city that had surfaced from the sands began to rise. Giant stone structures lifted into the air, defying gravity as they reassembled into a shape that no human mind could comprehend. The monolithic tower itself expanded, its smooth surface peeling away to reveal a hidden structure beneath, something far larger, far older. The lost city was not a ruin. It was a vessel. A massive, ancient construct, hidden beneath the Nile for tens of thousands of years. And it was activating. Leila stood frozen. They're not here to conquer, she whispered. They're here to leave. David turned to her, realization dawning. You think this was always the plan? She nodded. They were never meant to stay. The river was just their signal, the final key to reawakening their world. And now, they were preparing to ascend. As the rising city ship reached its peak, something unexpected happened. The architects turned toward the humans gathered at the Nile's edge. Their leader, the tallest among them, spoke once more, its voice resonating through Leila's mind. The river sustained you. The land nourished you. And yet, you have forgotten. Images flashed before Leila's eyes, ancient Egyptians, thriving under the architects' guidance. Then, rebellion. Fear. The architects retreating underground, sealing their knowledge away. The voice continued. We do not seek dominion. But we will not be forgotten again. The sky darkened as energy surged through the massive construct. The final sequence was beginning. And then came the final message. One of you must choose. Will the river remain as it is, or will we take it with us? Leila's heart pounded. They're asking us? David stepped forward. What if we say no? What if we don't want them to leave? The architect regarded him with an unreadable gaze. Then you will inherit the flood. Leila closed her eyes. If they refused, the transformation would continue. The Nile would reclaim everything. Civilization, as they knew it, would be rewritten. But if they accepted... She took a deep breath and spoke the words that would decide the fate of Egypt and the world. Go. A pause. Then the architect bowed its head. The covenant is complete. A final, blinding light erupted from the tower. The colossal city ship, now fully reassembled, lifted into the sky, ascending beyond the clouds, beyond the atmosphere, into the unknown. And just like that, the green tide stopped. The Nile returned to its natural course. The world exhaled. Leila and David stood in stunned silence as the last traces of the architects faded into the heavens. The river was theirs once more. But one truth remained. The Nile had always belonged to the first ones. And one day they might return again.